Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Abdelhamikael. I'm a professor and a researcher in cybersecurity at ISX School of Management. And I'll talk today about deepfakes as a cyber weapon where the attack surface is actually trust. So first of all, I would like to show you a video of a deepfake incident that happened 2 years ago. So there is no sound, so I'll comment the video. So basically here you have a finance worker at Arup who gets a meeting invitation, and she gets in a call with 3 colleagues about an urgent financial transaction that the CFO on the call is asking her to do. And she did, this finance worker did the transaction, and 1 week later, follow up with her CFO. And the CFO didn't know what transaction this person was talking about, because the 3 other people on the call were deepfakes. Sorry. Okay. So, and this transaction, this finance transaction, was slightly above $25 million. So that's the Arup deepfake case that happened in 2024. And what's interesting here is that everybody on the call was a deepfake. And why it worked? It worked for different reasons, where the deepfake managed to manipulate the perception of this finance worker of what was real. And the first thing is that there were multiple familiar faces, not just 1 colleague, but 3. 3 real colleagues of that finance worker. The second aspect is the real-time video interaction. This worker was able to interact with those 3 people. They were able to ask questions, and she got answer back from them. The third aspect is the synchronized audio and video. So while they were talking, it was perfect lip sync. It was also authentic or relatively authentic, familiar, like face expression. So the body language, the face expression were also seem authentic and coherent with what they were discussing on the conversation. Another aspect is the authority mixed with the urgency. The CFO was on the call, and she received a CFO-level instruction who was urging her to make that transfer, that money transfer. So here we have both the mix of, this is urgent, and I am your boss. And the last aspect is the hierarchical trust exploitation. So the employee was conditioned to follow order, not to question order that comes from the CFO or from a C-level executive. So the attackers here also exploited the organizational culture where you do what you're told. So if we put back this incident back into context, we have seen deepfake since 2019, evolving from voice-only deepfake to progressively video deepfake, and scaling of deepfakes to multiple person, like with real-time interaction. And now we see even more like deepfake as a service to engineer social engineer attack or AI-powered document to commit fraud. And 2024, which is the year where the Arup incident happened, is an escalation year where we have seen multiple events. Just to give you a few examples, over 2 months, we had multiple successful deepfake social engineering that include the Arup case. And so far, I could only find 1 case where the employee actually managed to prevent the deepfake to be successful, which is the deepfake of the CEO Mark Reed of WPP, which is an advertisement company. And the employee detected something suspicious and acted on their suspicion rather than obeying the instruction given by the executive, the CEO of, that was represented in the deepfake. So what I want to suggest here is a trust framework, because if trust becoming the attack surface in the case of deepfake, we need to restore trust. And this can be done through a framework in 5 stages or 5 components, which the first one is the threat governance. And the objective here is to make deepfake a recognized cyber risk and not just ad hoc event or an ad hoc risk. And that goes from the top level, having executive ownership, having executive who takes responsibility for a synthetic media risk. But that also means that the deepfake risk is integrated in risk register and in tabletop exercise or into playbook to react and prepare for it in a business continuity plan or in a crisis management situation. And the decision authority framework, so those would be the third aspect, defining a clear authority about specific operations that are maybe vulnerable to deepfake, such as financial transaction, or having authentication holds before executing high-value decision. And here it requires the organization to shift from a reactive to an anticipatory risk governance. The second aspect is robust verification protocol. And that means here that ensuring that every critical decision never rely on a single channel or a single signal. And that means having multi-channel verification standard for every executive instruction. And that may mean having 2 persons and two different people and 2 different channels to verify and confirm a transaction or a decision when it comes from the executive level. Another aspect is to have predefined authentication fallback during crisis. So what are the code phrases between 2 leadership members that enables to identify them and to authenticate them? What would be some making sure that the contact registry is always up to date with their with alternative channel communication channel. And always have an out-of-band verification, so to have separate verification and secure channel to be able to confirm the identity and confirm the instruction. And that can go through digital signatures or biometric authentication when possible. And that that requires to assume that the content is fake until verified. Unlike the Arab case where we saw the person executing the order because she assumed it was real. So we need to assume now that the content is fake by default. The third aspect is the user and especially executive readiness, requiring specific executive training on the synthetic media risk, but also building scenario-based drills. So, for example, a fake CEO call or a fake CFO order to see how the workforce is able to react and impede this from happening. But that's also going to require training, putting in place some decision-making heuristic. So how do we make decision when we're not always able to verify information beforehand, or right away at least? And that means also training people in identifying red flag, but also training people to pause and think or pause and verify, even if there is some pressure to act on a decision. And psychological resilience training is going to be an important part also because people are going to have to deal with the cognitive dissonance of the different signal. And that could be the authority bias, it's the CFO or the CEO giving an order, but it's also the social pressure or the emergency pressure. So how do we train people to have the good habits in those situations? And that means that cognitive resilience is going to become a security capability. The fourth aspect is the secure identity and communication channel. So we're going to need, the objective here is to protect the signal that the organization can rely on to establish trust. And that means having strong identity authentication, but also restrict the use of informal channel for critical decision. Might want to think about also digital working or sign communication when feasible, and platform security, so a lot of hardening of email security, hardening of video conferencing security also, as we have seen in the Arab case. And the goal here is to engineer trust in communication and decision-making processes, and not to assume that what we receive is trustworthy. The last aspect is the transparency and trust repair, because some of the deepfake are going to work. Some people are going to react on deepfake that are realistic, seems authentic, like the Arab case, and the organization is going to have to react. And that means having specific pre-approved communication templates for internal and external communication that will meet some of the scenario, the deepfake scenario that the organization has prepared with, so that the organization is able to communicate timely in those situations. Also involves having clear escalation paths in case of a deepfake attack, and maybe some internally, so that we are able, like the organization is able to make decision in a timely manner. There will be some need for post-incident trust repair, and that may go by having some specific stakeholder briefing, or that might be also communicating about the digital forensic work that the organization did to understand what happened and explain what it has been put in place to avoid the situation to happen again. And of course, this is a process, so learning and adapting from what has been learned from a deepfake attack, so that we can adjust the internal processes and communication channel. But this tape, the goal is to shift from speed, like to ensure that there is speed and clarity, so that reputational harm can be limited. If the attack happened, there will still be some reputation harm, but it's for the organization to limit the damages, but also take ownership about the communication about the incident. So that gives us the trust framework to be able to integrate the deepfake risk or any synthetic media risk into cybersecurity operation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm available if you have any questions.
Bravo, merci.